Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Welcome to this full moon forecast. We're going to be looking at our upcoming Scorpio flower full moon, which is May 12th, 2025, here in Western astrology land. Even in Eastern Vedic astrology, sidereal astrology, this full moon is still on the 12th. But we're going to be looking at the sign of Scorpio. We're going to look at the main astrological themes of the next 2 weeks. So the second half of the lunar cycle. We are in Taurus season right now. Happy Mother's Day as I'm recording this. You know, if you're not a mother, you have one. And so it's something that we can all get behind, we can all value, we can all take a moment to show appreciation and reverence for the principle of the divine feminine. So, and I love that, Taurus season is when we have Mother's Day here in the Western world. I can't speak for any other countries or any of their cultures, but I know here Mother's Day is celebrated in the midst of Taurus season, kind of right after Beltane, actually, after maybe not all the time after Beltane, but around Beltane. So I also have my cow sweatshirt on to commemorate just Taurus season in general. And for those of you who are familiar, of course, with astrology, Taurus is the second house, ruled by Venus. So this is the sign of the manifest divine feminine, the medium of our growth, right? The living soil, the principle of divine feminine, the Empress in the tarot, right, is ruled by the planet Venus and the energy of that incarnate divine feminine. So happy Mother's Day, everyone. And let's get right into this forecast. So I just take a minute to acknowledge that I've been radio silent for just a little while. I was on vacation, some really good sun, lots of really good rest, a true self-retreat that I've personally needed for a long time. I am very grateful that it was planned for this time period. It turned out to be way more challenging than I think that many of us may have anticipated. I want to go back and look at the new moon, the beginning of the lunar cycle that is now coming to fulfillment with the full moon. It promises to be very powerful, as I would say most Scorpio full moons usually are at this time of year. 2 years ago, I think, we had an eclipse of the Scorpio full moon, and thankfully we're coming out of eclipse season already. So that's been a relief. Although I will say that one of the things that just through conversation with people, I remember saying that now that the eclipse we're kind of out of the eclipse shadow, it feels like the real work has started. So I want to go back and look at the energy of the new moon just to anchor ourselves back into the beginning of this and to get a sense of what, our purpose that we're going to clarify and that is illuminated with this full moon, get a sense of where it started, right? It's always good to go back for this retrospective. The other piece of this, there's a couple different pieces of this. Black Moon Lilith is also in Scorpio, right? The lunar apogee, which means that the full moon is actually going to be pretty much as far away from us in its orbit that it can be, right? That's what Black Moon Lilith represents. It is the lunar apogee, the space in the orbit that is furthest in distance from the planet. And in astrology, Black Moon Lilith represents this primal space within us, this darkness or this void or this infinite space that is meant to be filled with the divine flame, with God's influence, right, and inspiration, the Holy Spirit, if you want to think about it that way, however it makes sense to you. And oftentimes why Black Moon Lilith gets a negative reputation is that, when we attempt to fill that space with our own selves, right? Through our ego, through fear, through a sense of needing to overcompensate, we feel disempowered, through trauma or shame, whatever it is, that space, when we feel cut off or frustrated in some way, or don't feel that divine inspiration coming into us, then oftentimes we will overcompensate or undercompensate and betray ourselves, basically, in order to feel a sense of power. And so that's where Black Moon Lilith will often go sideways. And so in the natal chart, especially, either myself and certainly clients, I tend to, it's a marker to ask the question. So how is this person, or how do I tend to tap into that power when I'm feeling disempowered, or where is it likely that I'm going to overcompensate when I'm feeling disconnected or frustrated or cut off from divine inspiration or the Holy Spirit. So it's no joke. A full moon in Scorpio is no joke. It's already like intense, and the feels are very intense as well. And there's a lot of power that's generated in Scorpio in general, right? Scorpio, the eighth house, these are shared resources. This is power dynamics. This is also trust and intimacy and vulnerability in the eighth house. With Black Moon Lilith here, it's that much more intense and that much more possible for disempowerment and the fracturing of trust, for instance, when our intimacy is betrayed in some way, our vulnerability is betrayed in some way, and we act out as a means to satisfy or to nurture those wounds, right? That's where Black Moon Lilith can go sideways. And so she's back in Scorpio for this full moon. So we know that the full moon is going to be at its apogee furthest away. That means that the new moon, because Black Moon Lilith was in the same place at the time of the new moon, in terms of the oscillating or the true Lilith, right? Because it's an oscillating point. It goes back and forth, much like all of life, right? So Lilith is a big player in all of this. Of course, Pluto is now retrograde, and I will say that I suspected that once that happened, a lot of the really distinct challenges that people were experiencing, things that were happening at the collective level with Pluto and Aquarius, were having their impact on most people, especially the starseeds. But I would say most of us, it was definitely impacting most people in a pretty significant way. And everybody's challenges have been a little bit different, but also ongoing, I'd say even since Easter, ongoing, and ultimately has let up just a little bit since the retrograde of Pluto. But that doesn't mean that Pluto's not still involved in this conversation. In fact, there's going to be a square between Mercury, newly in Taurus, in a square to Pluto. So a lot of fixed energy still, right? With Pluto in Aquarius, with Mars in Leo, now out of its shadow. And of course, the axis of the full moon with the sun and the moon in fixed Taurus and fixed Scorpio. Other things going on this next 2 weeks is that Sun and Uranus in Taurus conjunct exactly on the 17th of May. That's going to be happening, so we want to take some time to really unpack that. It will still be in opposition to Black Moon Lilith, so she's a huge player in all of this, which really just intensifies the power involved in this full moon, and it's the power that is generated in relationships. So we can't always control the energy that others put into a situation. And I'm going to go into a little bit more about that as we get into the full moon energy as a whole. But just this dynamic and this tension with the Taurus energy and the Scorpio energy of what is inherently valuable and what is generated, how much more is generated through the process of communion. Right? Because the eighth house and Scorpio is that energy. What we put in, we get exponentially more out of it. And that's where magic happens. And that's part of relationships. So it really depends. It really depends on what the nature of these relationships are for you. Of course, knowing where Taurus and Scorpio are in your charts are going to give you an idea of what areas of life this is going to be most impactful. But I do feel like this full moon, talk about clarifying an illuminating purpose. It might be far away. It might not be a huge orb of a full moon because it's furthest away, but because Black Moon Lilith is involved, there's even something more powerful involved here with this full moon. And there's, of course, just like with every astrological transit, there's tons of potential, but there's also things to there's also things to be revealed, right? The Sun conjunct Uranus will most certainly bring some things out of the woodwork that we did not anticipate, that happens very quickly and suddenly, and has a lot to do with freedom and rebellion. So that is a little bit difficult, and has been for a while now, with Uranus moving through the sign of Taurus, which is stability, which is patience, security. It's the physical earth, right? The salt of the earth is the Taurus energy, the actual soil. And so these drastic changes and moving around in things that seemingly are solid and immovable have been very difficult. Now, the other thing about this is that the Sun and Uranus will be conjunct each other pretty much on top of the Pleiades. So you can bet that there's going to be a very large activation here. And it's not like this conjunction doesn't happen, especially in the last couple of years, every year because of the retrogrades of Uranus. It keeps coming back and forth over the Pleiades, but this one opposite Black Moon Lilith, I think is going to be, again, it's really going to draw out those power dynamics and those places where we don't feel maybe safe or secure, or we feel like there needs to perhaps an intercession in some way. So we'll get more into that imagery as we go along. And last but not least, Saturn is going to come into Aries. So during this next 2 weeks, and I will tell you that Saturn is at its fall position in Aries. Okay, it's exalted in Libra because the Saturn is the planetary ruler of structure and limitation and a sense of power, and not like the occult power that Scorpio in the 8th house represents, but a very institutional power of Capricorn in the 10th house. That energy coming into a weakened territory, a place where a territory where it's weakened. That's what a fall position is. It is not at its detriment, it's not at its weakest, but it's the next level up. So still weak, but not exactly at its worst. However, it's going to be here for a minute. Saturn and Neptune will be conjunct several times between now and 2027 because of the retrogrades. So there'll be lots to explore with Saturn in Aries as we go through the months ahead, okay? But what I will say is the best case scenario, in my opinion, when I really feel into this energy of Saturn in Aries, because it's at its fall position, some questions you want to ask yourself here about this energy, right? What happens when an energy that Saturn represents of structure, of limitation, of institution, is at a weakened position, right? Kind of the same thing with Lilith. What happens when these parts of ourselves, we feel disempowered or we feel like we need to compensate? Well, the first thing I thought about was like, well, if you have these institutions weakening in some way, and granted, or being in a territory that doesn't really have a structure, right? Aries, there's no structure here. It's just the divine spark. On the best case scenario to envision this, I think, is the Emperor card in the tarot, right? Because it is the 4th card. It's got a very square structure. The Capricornian energy in some of the minor arcana cards, like the 4 of Discs, for instance, this is very secure. And it's a Capricorn card, and I just get this sense with the Emperor as the archetype here, or the symbolism related to Aries specifically, that there is a structure here. And so, but, it could easily get tyrannical, right, with Saturn and Aries, as there's newness coming in, if there's a fresh start, if there's potential energy that can go somewhere brand new and there's growth potential, which is what you get with Aries, then, Saturn, that is representing a structure that is institutional and very limiting, could get more limiting and more institutional. And so, there are ways to work with this energy, and certainly to be aware of it. And it's just going to start as Saturn comes into Aries in this next these next 2 weeks. So lots to consider. So there's a lot of upheaval that's potential here. And I would say that the purpose that we are to clarify and that is being illuminated is really how we can take that raw energy that comes from any type of relationship, even if we didn't choose it consciously, even if we don't have any choice on the energy that is entering the system, for instance, we still have the ability to alchemize that, to transform, and to go through a metamorphosis in some ways with that energy. So let's just get right into the chart. First, though, however, just to, it's always good to review. And there's, and where did that go? Oh, I closed that out. So I just wanted to show you, I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to show you our eightfold lunar lunation phase. That way we are, remembering where we are in the lunar cycle here. So there we go. Now I can share it. Window. There we go. So if you remember this, I'll make it bigger so we can really look at it. So here's the new moon phase, first quarter phase, the waxing gibbous, and we've been going through all of this, right? My new being to emerge and project, and that was at the new moon at the very end of April, right? And then we have our crescent moon. We're struggling and moving forward. Boy, there was a lot of struggle. Activate my personality, act and build. Evaluate my expression, which is where we've been, and then we get to the full moon, right? Clarify my purpose, illumine and fulfill. So this is where we start to consciously and objectively start letting go of that which is going to hold us back from fulfilling our purpose. And that purpose was initiated with the last new moon in Taurus. So lunation phase, you can look that up if you want to find a different chart by Dane Rudger, and that will give you you can find something similar or that very same graph to show you all 8 phases and what they represent when you get to them, because it's a really good way to kind of track your own progress, see where you fit in to the current lunar cycle and how you can make the most of the energy of these transits. So one thing I do want to share here, and I'm just going to read from a Twitter or an X post, and then in the description box, it's going to be in a pinned comment of this video. I will pin a video for you to watch. So, and many of you might already know this. I think this is really actually a big part of what's been going on. Because these posts are very recent, but I'm sure they've been calculating this message for quite a while. And I know people have been really struggling over the past couple of weeks, very physically in some ways. And sometimes it's hard to know, like, what is a natural upgrade, which some people call ascension symptoms. I'm very wary to get too involved in that particular narrative because I don't think it's that cut and dry. However, I do feel like that and there's been a lot of solar activity, like a lot. Maybe not huge flares necessarily, but big coronal hole streams and solar wind that has just been bouncing around the grid system of the planet for weeks now. And the Schumann has been, up until somewhat recently, very active, almost every day, amplifying for weeks. So it has been intense. And I think that there's always a piggybacking off of these natural solar enhancements that are coming. I think that there's always an unnatural technological piggyback, but that's just me. That's just my opinion about that. But I think that it's been a huge struggle physically. So there's been a lot of really having to manage some very uncomfortable states of being and how we actually make the most of those things. Because the natural Taurus position is just to be kind of complacent in some ways. Like, that's the worst case scenario for Taurus. Please, Taurus, don't take that as offensive. I have Taurus in my life, I promise. And there is a propensity to be lazy and almost slothful because there is a density to Taurus energy. It is the inert soil, right? There is a passiveness to the feminine qualities of earth and water. And the negative side of Taurus is kind of just being apathetic and complacent and very stubborn, and lazy, right? You're thinking Ferdinand the Bull, right? Just sniffing the flowers until, it's time to be activated. So it can be, especially when you're talking about the nature of the body, right? Because Taurus in the second house does represent that what is. Not so much the process of your healing, which is more of a Virgo thing, but the process, the state of health itself, your body, your anatomy, your physiology, and structure, right? And I think that has really, not only with the planet itself, has been getting this up leveling, but we're going right along with it. And I think Pluto in Aquarius has been a huge part of, this engine up until somewhat recently. We're getting a reprieve. So let me read you the Voyager 1 thing. And like I said, many of you already know about this, and so you can always just go search it in your own social media networks. And then, like I said, in the comment section, I'll have a video linked if you want to get some more information, because there's something about this. And I've heard other people speak about this too, that there's something about this that has embedded itself into what's going on. And I wouldn't be surprised, let's just say, that this is part of what's also been going on the last couple of weeks. And we just, I personally had no idea. I could just tell that something was changing, and that we were learning how to manage this. Even if we can't necessarily control for it, we're learning how to manage it. And this full moon is going to be an indication of how far we've really come and what we can do with that. So this particular post is from May 8th, and it says Voyager 1, which is now an interstellar space. And if you're not familiar with the Voyager spacecraft, they were launched in the 70s, and there's 2 space probes. And the idea was for them to get past our solar system. So, which is now in interstellar space, Voyager 1 has apparently detected and relayed a non-human, non-natural signal. I don't know if it's non-natural because it's non-human, but it says non-natural signal, which appears to be intelligent in nature. So how could it be non-natural if it appears to be intelligent in nature? Anyway, AI software scanned the signals, and so that's more about in the video, the actual software itself, and discovered the encoded message in the Voyager 1 transmission. As those of you who have followed me this is that particular person, this account on X, and they're saying pagan. That's funny. Their account says pagan, Lovecraftian, alternative folklore, chaos, transporter. Oh boy. I know who this person is. The quality of your dreaming, improving the quality of your dreaming using art and sorcery. I wouldn't let this guy get near me with a 10-foot pole. That's just saying. Because I've been involved with these people in the past and I know better now. However, I'm just reading a post. Voyager spacecraft, as the 2 Voyager spacecraft enter deeper into interstellar space, that the rules of reality would break down, not just for the spacecraft, but for here on Earth. The point is, I'm just reading to you that they've detected and relayed this non-human signal, which appears to be intelligent, and there is a quantum AI program called Prometheus that, speaking of Uranus, which we're having involved very, in the next 2 weeks, the Sun-Uranus conjunction with the Pleiades. And I'm going to put these on in a second. This has been a thing over the last couple of weeks. And so some other things that I've heard, and I haven't listened in fullness to the video that I'm going to link, but I've heard other people talking about it on other channels. And there was this report that anybody who had interacted with the signal were getting different images associated with what they were hearing and seeing, that it was unique to the individual, and that people who did interact with the signal were having some serious mental health issues, supposedly after. So I'm going to have to do some more research on that. So as I go through this, I want you to, put a pin in that in terms of what has been going on or in terms of what you've been experiencing the last couple of weeks. Because some of you have talked to personally, and like we've all been kind of going through something that has not responded to our normal protocols of managing our health and the state of our energetic body. Right. I know that for me, that's been the case. And so, doing my best to manage and mitigate those symptoms, knowing that what I was doing was actually not touching it. And then it was just like all of a sudden Pluto station retrograde, and then like a day or two past that, it all started to dissipate, right? And I was like, oh, thanks. And it does feel like a reprieve, but at the same time, it's a reprieve so that we can fully embrace what it is that we've learned over the last 2 weeks about the state of our bodies, of our energy, and what we can utilize in terms of making the most of what we are interacting with. So we don't have, like I said, we don't necessarily have a lot of control over what life gives us. And I know it's a total cliche, and I'm going to bring up the chart here, and we're going to get into the astrology. And I know it's a total cliche, the cliche statement, of course, of when life gives you lemons type of thing. But that is, hold on, let me go back to where we're supposed to be. Because there we go. I never brought it back to where we were supposed to be for this full moon on the chart. And then we'll get into it. But when life hands you lemons, right, you make lemonade. And I know that like I said, I know it's a cliche, but there's a reason cliches exist, number one. Number two, it actually represents, in my opinion, it's so simple, but it's the idea of the Taurus, Scorpio, or the second and eighth house opposition, right? When life gives you something. So the lemons and life are the nature of our second house, or Taurus, for instance. Taurus is the natural ruler of the second house, which is the objective reality that our subjective personality, which is the first house, interacts with. The first house, or Aries, is the seed. Taurus is the soil. So that's your lemons. Well, when life hands them to you, that's Libra and the seventh house. That is when the relationship between us as a personality, the I am, becomes the we are. And the seventh house in Libra is very contractual. It has to do with commitments and contracts. So marriages are in the seventh house, business contracts, any type of contractual one-on-one relationship that you are personally invested in, whether it's personal, whether it's business, whether it's spiritual, is the seventh house. The eighth house in Scorpio is the raw power that is generated. So if it's in a business contract, it is the profits that you make or the resources that you generate. If you're in a romantic or committed partnership or a marriage, the eighth house is when you bring your resources together and create something more than what you individually put in. So this could be your collective domestic resources. It could be the sexual energy and the sexual union that eventually creates a life, right? Or is, bringing that enhanced energy into your physicality, right? If you're not necessarily engaging in sexual activity for the express purpose of reproduction, then that relationship and those actions in a committed and invested in relationship will generate the potency in order to basically fill your cup, so to speak, right? And so the energy of Scorpio in the eighth house is about power, but it's not about individual power. It is about a collective power that is generated in relationship. So when life gives you the lemons, you make lemonade. And so we don't always have the control as a personality or as an ego necessarily. We don't control what is necessarily the other party is bringing into the situation. The best case scenario is that you know what they're bringing and it's contractual and you know what to expect, and they know what to expect out of you. I'm going to bring this, you're going to bring this, we're going to see where it balances, and from there, there is a magic that happens, and there is a trust and a vulnerability that is part of the 8th house in Scorpio. There's also a drive to get deeper, to get more, and this is where things also go sideways, and that there is betrayal or there is ritual, right? There is sacrifice in the 8th house, because what is dying is the personal individual ego for the sake of the collective creation, whatever that is in the relationship. So I do feel like that there's lots that we have not been able to control for, right? But we have the capacity to engage in that relationship, whatever it is, and what we do put into that does have an impact on the overall creation or generation of energy or power from that communion, right? And so we may find that, for instance, we're being, bombarded with these solar enhancements, right? We're getting all of this plasma from the sun, these charged particles that are entering our ionosphere and magnetosphere. The grid of the planet is taking on this extra energy and redistributing it. There have been a lot of big earthquakes. I mean, we were definitely overdue. And then this energy came into the system and has been moving around consistently, I think, for weeks now. And there was a big between 7 and 8 magnitude down by Drake's Passage, which is, southern Argentina. There have been some other large quakes, and even quakes that are not on quote unquote fault lines, I've noticed, but they're definitely on the North American craton. It's just not something that USGS acknowledges exists, but anybody who is following any type of earthquake or seismology knows that there is the North American craton, and there's been quite a bit of activity along that somewhat recently. So the changes that have been happening, and it's like an opportunity to make that lemonade, whatever that is, right? And we are going to, with this full moon, what is illuminated, I think, is this ability to take that base energy and to transform it, to metamorphosize into something more ethereal, if that makes sense. Now, the fact that Lilith is in tow with all of this, and in fact, if you really are looking here, you'll see that Lilith is in, it's loose, but is in a T-square with the Mercury-Pluto square that is also exact on the same day. So she's still very much involved in what's going on here with this full moon. But I'd like to read real quick what the Sabian symbol is for 22 to 23 degrees Scorpio and Taurus, for that matter. So you get an idea of what it is we're really talking about symbolically when it comes to Scorpio. And by the way, we're getting into, like I said earlier, into the territory of the Pleiades. So this is going to be a very significant activation for those who identify and have Pleiadian starseed markings in their chart. And I will say that one of the more difficult aspects of being a Pleiadian starseed, and personal experience, and with every client I've ever worked with who has strong Pleiades in their charts, the thing is that there is, these individuals are natural healers. They're incredibly empathic. They tend to be very loving and very physically affectionate, right? But the thing is that the boundaries are very poor, because there's really the Pleiadian signature. There is no need for boundary, because there is no opportunity necessarily, or even possibility for that type of betrayal, or being vulnerable doesn't leave you open to being hurt or manipulated in any way. And so that energy now coming into the human experience, I think, is actually really difficult. And there's a lot of people who have strong Pleiades starseed markings in their chart. There's a lot of us. And it's very popular, right? And of course, the Seven Sisters is just scattered throughout all of our cultural and historical narratives in different ways. And so there's clearly something going on there from the frequency coming from that star cluster. But I will say that there is They're poor emotional boundaries, a lot of food sensitivities, that kind of stuff, right? Just being too open in terms of boundaries. It's one of the biggest lessons for Pleiadian starseeds is to learn how to be an empath without just being sucked dry or being unduly influenced by outside sources or anything really. So I think that there's going to be some real healing around this as well. Oh, and that's another big transit. Speaking of healing, and we'll get to this, Jupiter and Chiron are going to be in a sextile during this time as well, like an exact sextile. So this is a really big moment as well, and a connection to the nodes of the moon. So there is also something going on there. So we'll get into that because that's later in this. But right now, talking about the full moon in Scorpio, and the standard Pleiadian starseed or just Pleiadian energy in general is not necessarily driving for deeper and for more, right? It's just being in resonance with what is, which is a very Taurus type of thing, right? The Scorpio energy is how civilization gets built. You know what I mean? So, and there's a sense of, I think, knowing when you go into the shadow of your own subconscious that there is the possibility that you're going to have to touch, make contact with, look at yourself in the mirror, right? And that can be really difficult. It's like that scene, I talk about this a lot, but it's that scene in the Never-Ending Story when he's going through the 3 challenges. And the last one is to look at himself in the mirror and not, totally lose it. That's a big 8th house theme, is being able to face your own shadow and integrate it as opposed to run away screaming. So 23 degrees Scorpio, a rabbit metamorphoses into a nature spirit. So the raising of animal drives to a higher level, right? So the rabbit is traditionally a symbol of an overabundance of progeny. Nature spirits, on the other hand, represent the higher aspects of life energies, as they are said to guide those normally invisible forces controlling the growth of all living organisms. So the symbol refers to the transmutation of the generative power into a more ethereal and subtle form of potency. Whether it's sexual desire or aggressiveness, the instinctual urge can be raised to a new level, and it's a process of transubstantiation. So we're taking the value of what is, right, and raising it and transubstantiating it into something more ethereal, something more potent, right? We're kind of rising out of those animal drives. Now, the thing, again, as I've said many times about this, is that with Lilith involved in this conversation since even the beginning with the new moon, and it's exactly where it was when it was at the new moon before, or when it was at the new moon, the same basic area of Scorpio, is that those animal drives, that primal connection is a lot stronger right now. And so there is, the power dynamics are going to be pretty substantial. Now you add into that this square with Mercury and Pluto. There's some intense conversations and some very deep transformative thinking here that could be going on, right? It's all squares are attention, and remember that Pluto is retrograde right now, so the demolition machine is cooling off, and we get to have much more of an introspective and internalized approach to this transformative energy that Pluto represents in the collective, because we're talking about Aquarius. So this square creates tension, urging you to confront rigid thought patterns or power structures, especially in communication, maybe in your own mind, maybe in your nervous system as a whole, right? Because Mercury is talking about, our consciousness as it functions, right? Which has a lot to do with our nervous system and our brain. You may not entirely, obviously, but it is the processor, essentially. You may feel compelled to dig beneath the surface for truth, but resistance to change could cause mental friction. And believe me, Taurus is definitely restriction and resistance. I would say resistance to change, the Taurus energy of, especially with Mercury there. So conversations can feel very intense. They could be even manipulative. But I would say with the retrograde of Pluto right now is probably as much more of an intense conversation within ourselves. And the best case scenario here is a breakthrough because of the tension, right? If you embrace the flexibility, right? That's the thing. Again, if Mercury's really good at that, ruling immutable signs that, it's not exactly at its best in Taurus. It's not its worst, but it could definitely represent a lack of flexibility in terms of how we think, what we think about, the information, and certainly about resources, right? Pluto retrograde encourages introspection. So reflecting on things like values or resources or societal roles may reveal hidden insights or spark something innovative, right? So along with the full moon, we get this square that's really a wide or loose T square with Lilith involved as well. And so it's not just above, it's, the mental energy is really drawing us to thinking about the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and but Lilith and Pluto in this T square feel like, well, how are we going to get there? And what are we going to do with it when we get there? Right. And that's the Pluto and Aquarius energy, because we have a responsibility to demonstrate and to demonstrate whatever it is that we generate and to utilize it for good, for healing or for, any type of good for the community. I think that's really what we're coming at with this full moon, personally, as my personal read on all of this, and that we are learning to, and we have a responsibility to take all of the challenging situations that we've been dealing with and that have really amped up in the last couple of weeks, and be able to transmute them, to transubstantiate that energy into something more powerful, more etheric, and to be prepared for when Pluto comes back to this point, after it's direct and after it comes back to this point, that we are prepared, I think, to demonstrate what it is that we have developed and learned and how to take that energy and actually utilize it for good. It's not enough to just find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Certainly that seems like a great idea, and that's Mercury and Taurus right now is certainly leading us to that. But the Lilith energy opposite of that is just like, what do we do with that energy? And what is it really, where is the real wealth of that situation? Because if you just hoard it and hold on to it and don't share it or don't, invest it in some way. And that's where Lilith is like, there has to be an investment of this energy in some way into some type of relationship, into, your own work. And in order to really be prepared to demonstrate that work for the community, for society, those Aquarian themes, just for the up leveling. And there are things that need to be let go of course. I mean, that's a consistent theme of life in general, right? That there's no static energy, that it's always dynamic, and that we're always growing and reaching fulfillment and then letting go, and things are dying and then regenerating. So and that's a big Scorpio theme as well. But, we need to I think this is the tension here is really going to be, it's great to have this idea of linking our material, physical form with our energy and with our soul, right? To bring the earthly and celestial nature together, because that's really what the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow really is. But there's more to it, right? There's more to it, and how we manage that, how we master that is, I think, a big part of this full moon, right? Again, transubstantiation. It's not enough to tap into this raw power. We actually have to transmute it in some ways. And it has not been easy. And the best teacher almost all the time is experience and failure, right? And I think that a lot of people have been going through a lot of that recently. So let's start moving forward from this full moon. Let me find my notes here. So, I mean, the moon will continue its transit through Scorpio. I think its opposition to Uranus is going to be really important to pay attention to throughout, by the end of the day. So, because again, we're getting into Pleiadian territory for sure. And those degrees of 24 degrees Taurus up to 0 degrees Gemini, everything opposite of that in Scorpio is still a Pleiadian activation. It's just one that is not in resonance with the normal Pleiadian signature, right? Because there isn't a drive to get at the root of anything with the Pleiadian energy. It's just to be in harmony with what is, right? It's very natural. And this is why Pleiadian starseeds tend to not have very good boundaries, because you just want to be this nature loving type of person that's really just tuned into everything. And there's an incredible power to that. But part of being human is this drive towards something more. So the Scorpio energy is actually much more in tune with Alpha Centauri. So I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here, but if you've had a starseed reading with me, then you are aware of the Alpha Centaurian energy and how it is an output. It is an infinite output. These beings and the starseed energy of Alpha Centauri is it's an infinite output, because you're not outputting from yourself or your own energy. You're outputting from something that is infinite and that is at the root of all things, right? And this is a lot of how Reiki actually is practiced, or those types of energy work modalities. So the Pleiadian energy is still very much at play here. And I think it's going to really come out with this opposition. It's going to come out when the Sun and Uranus are in conjunction the next week, and that Lilith will be opposite of that. So, but this opposition with Moon and Uranus is, again, it's just going to really bring out the tension between this need for freedom and to break out of the mold with Uranus. Even in Taurus, it's ready to break out of a mold here. It's ready to move beyond what has been and embrace what is coming that is new. And, it's preparing to come into Gemini, which is about these two sides of the same coin. But this moon in Scorpio in particular is going to be the tension point of, yeah, but I need emotional security or depth, right? Like, it can't get depth if I'm breaking out of the old system and looking to break myself free of these old paradigms. There's this emotional kind of depth here. And that's the thing about a moon in Scorpio. You got to be really aware of the fact that if you go too deep, like, it might be really difficult to pull yourself back up. And this dynamic with this moon opposite Uranus, I think, is gonna bring it out quite a bit, especially again because Lilith is involved, and this is where Lilith will be when the Sun and Uranus come into their conjunction on the 17th. So the 13th is when Venus comes out of her retrograde shadow. That's something to pay attention to as well. So then we have Mars out of its retrograde shadow, and now we have Venus out of her retrograde shadow. And those two actually are going to be in a fire trine very soon, also during this 2 weeks, and out of shadow. So there's some very beautiful cohesion in terms of creativity and spark and this and passion and a sense of confidence with Mars and Leo in particular. Now, granted, Venus is at her detriment in Aries, so we have to be a little bit mindful of that, that she's not at her best in Aries either. She's definitely very, I don't want to say short-tempered, but kind of. She's just not, it's not a good look for Venus when she's in the masculine sign like this. And so, but I think that there's still something to be said for these two coming into a trine. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're just talking about her coming out of her retrograde shadow after the 13th, and the moon will be in Sag, right? We all love a moon in Sag. Everybody feels very optimistic and kind of like feeling into the big picture. And yes, there's some strength that definitely comes through experience with a moon in Sagittarius. So And you can see Lilith back in the game again. Now, this time, the fixed square is with Mars in Leo. This 12 degrees of Scorpio and a square to 12 degrees Mars. And so there is certainly cross purposes in terms of where we're acting and putting our personal energy and output into our own personal creativity and expressions. And again, Lilith is in the sign of like, well, it's think about how much more you can get when you are taking it from other people, for instance, or perhaps there is there's a hierarchy at play here that might be worth considering, right? That, power dynamics are symbolized in a society through their hierarchy. And Mars is going to be like, kind of screw your hierarchy. Like, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to say what I want. I'm going to express myself very instinctually. So let's look at 12 degrees Leo. Oh, yeah, an evening party of adults on a lawn, right? Group relaxation in fashionable surroundings as an escape from work routine. So this is going to be fun. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to have this square. Right, because Mars is going to be like, screw convention, right? Like, screw your hierarchy. I just want to like relax and like cut loose and just be with people, right? We can just leave our we can just check our social roles at the door here, and we can just be ourselves amongst each other. But there's this sticking point with Lilith. Because if we don't keep those power structures and hierarchies in place, this is one way that I think Lilith can kind of like be the devil on the shoulder type of thing, to just be like, well, there's no power in that. We need to maintain these power hierarchies, right? That we have to the symbol of what power means and how everybody's distributed in a society or in a relationship. So this is going to be fun. Personally, I think that it's going to really challenge the status quo, so to speak. When you kind of get beyond the relativity of like the seemingly contrasting social values, and everybody can just sit down and like, be with each other, be human with each other, right? Leo is about like the common collective humanity, the heart. So that's going to be really interesting, this square. The 17th is where, so this is going to be, throughout the week, we're going to see the moon move through Sagittarius. Of course, it's going to come into Capricorn as well. But the big one, I think, is going to be this Sun conjunct Uranus, pretty much right on top of each other, and then also in conjunction with the Pleiades. So, and that's going to be while the moon is in Capricorn, which is very serious and is much more interested in, just feeling into responsibility, right? Because it's in its detriment, right? The moon wants to be in Cancer. And so in Capricorn, it's not about how we feel. It's about what's best for the family, what's best for the group. It's like, being very serious and responsibility oriented in terms of your feelings. You kind of put your own feelings aside with the moon in Capricorn. So very responsible type of energy, but it's hard when you have to put your own feelings aside. So Sun and Uranus coming into a conjunction at the Pleiades, 28 degrees of Taurus. That is a woman past her change of life, embraces a new love. Now, this is also in alignment with Algol, right, the head of the Gorgon. So there is a lot of energy of bereavement and death and beheading that goes along with this area of the sky. But ultimately, what we're talking about is our capacity to rise in consciousness and feelings above what? Biological limitations. So the idea here that we are not just a collection of biochemicals and it's just a fixed material reality. There's something more to just these biological limitations. And I think there's going to be kind of an opening or certainly an awakening that comes along with this. So this transit could easily spark a desire to break free from routines, restrictive situations, especially things that have to do with values and self-worth or physical comforts, because that's what we're talking about with Taurus. You might feel an urge to take a step that's bold and unconventional, like starting a new financial venture. But I do also feel like just redefining personal values, right? Knowing that there are things that are changing and that doesn't mean it's the end, right? Or embracing a sudden shift in how you express stability. I think that's another thing too, or how you express health or how you express value. Those things could easily change and you could just feel that spark. Conjunctions are not exactly always awesome. They tend to be very dynamic and triggering. So sudden changes can come with Uranus and the sun coming together. So it can bring unexpected events or insights and disrupting the usual calm of the Taurus energy. And then opposite Lilith, you are just to be forewarned that the power dynamics that are going to come into play are going to be significant. This could look like a surprise opportunity, a shift in perspective, or an abrupt change in circumstances, especially in Taurus-ruled areas of your chart. So it's important to know where these areas are. Innovation, instability. So the conjunction can inspire creative ways to approach security, right? So rethinking, again, what stability means to you. It's time to balance tradition with progress, because Uranus ruling Aquarius definitely has that focus of progress and liberation. So and again, there is a tension, feeling torn between clinging to comfort and embracing change. And Uranus and Taurus has certainly been priming us or just like pushing us off the ledge constantly about creating comfort where there isn't any stability, right? And so I think this is about to get, especially when you are kind of connected to an old role or an old set of values that no longer apply to you because of change and because of what's changing around you. So this can create restlessness, but getting pushed out of your comfort zone can really stimulate some personal growth here. So I would just say, be open to it, be aware that the potential is here. And opposite Lilith, like I said, the power dynamics are going to be significant. So right after this, so this is next weekend, Saturday the 17th, and you can see that here's Lilith coming into an exact opposition with the sun and Uranus, and then we have a square building between Mercury, another fixed square, so lots of fixed energy, still Mercury in a square to Mars and Leo, right? Now, we had this square already once. It was the first quarter square with the sun at 15 Taurus and the moon in Leo. And so this energy is coming back. So we had a crisis in action with a first quarter moon, what do I do? And now it's going to be in terms of the thought processes and the way that we think and the way that our minds are working with Mercury in a square to Mars and Leo, which again is our personal initiation of our creativity, our passion, our self-expression, being very dynamic, being very bold, being very confident, and Mercury being very patient, methodical, very deliberate in our communication and our thoughts, right? You can see how these two coming into a square is going to create some drama here, especially when we're talking about Leo, because Mercury is favoring, like I said, that slow, practical thinking, grounded expression, and Mars is going to be very passionate, very dramatic, very assertive. So this can spark some conflict. And especially stubbornness clashing with pride or ego. So there could be heated arguments. There could be impulsive decisions. There could just be another level of that crisis in action with the first quarter moon of like, I really want to just, act on demonstrating my public achievements in some way, demonstrating my achievements in some way. And Mercury is like, well, we're still developing resilience under adversity. Like we may not be quite there yet. So expect challenges in balancing patience with urgency, right? Conversations may feel strained, especially because Mercury in Taurus is going to really want to have us being methodical and patient and practical. And Mars is just like, no, like it's so exhibitionist in this particular degree, right? And it could be very blunt. It could be overly forceful. The best way to navigate this is to stay calm, to listen. If you find yourself in a position where you can't necessarily get your side out, maybe just listening carefully, staying calm, being patient, avoid reactive outbursts, right? Because Mars and Leo is definitely going to push us into reactive outbursts. Channeling this energy into constructive and creative outlets is very useful. Now, at the same time this is happening, like I said, Jupiter is going to sextile Chiron. It's going to T-square the nodes of the moon. And then we're going to have our next quarter moon. And God, it just seems like it never ends. So Jupiter in a sextile to Chiron, the wounded healer. First of all, this is a big starseed activation because Jupiter will be in conjunction with Gemini, Orion starseed, and then Chiron is coming into conjunction with the Andromeda galaxy. So there's a lot of healing that happens with a Jupiter sextile Chiron, and really addressing some personal wounds with Chiron in Aries. And what I get from this is that the healing and the opportunities for healing, the growth through vulnerability that we get from just acknowledging our wounds with Chiron, it feels like to me that the ability to kind of strip everything down to its essential rhythm, right? That Gemini theme of everything comes down to this duality or this contrast, and you can dress it up however you want, but at the end of the day, you're just kind of stripping it all down to the essential rhythm of existence. And I think that is going to be very useful in terms of addressing personal wounds related to identity, to self-assertion, and kind of getting caught up in the potentiality of everything, right? That's the thing about Aries and these late degrees of Aries, that the potentiality of what we can create, what we can how we can project ourselves into the world. Sometimes we can just be too full, right? More than we can hold. And I think that it's very easy to kind of get obsessed with our potentiality and never act on anything or substantiate anything. And I think that this sextile is going to be very useful in terms of stripping everything down to the essential rhythm of existence. That's actually the Sabian symbol for 26 degrees Gemini, archetypal form, and allow us to not only highlight these wounds of identity and self-assertion and courage, but also to get allow us to actually take action. When we can kind of strip everything down to its bare essentials, then we don't get caught up in like analysis paralysis type of thing. There's too many things that I can do or I want to do. I don't even know where to start. And what about like in terms of healing? Because this is a big healing type of transit. So that's something to keep in mind here, is that there's confidence with Jupiter here, and confidence in a way that you can strip away all of the extraneous stuff and really see things for what they are. And that confidence allows us to confront issues a lot easier, I think, right? And there's a type of versatility here with Gemini, right? Because it's mutable, and there's also, I feel like being able to express to other people, sharing your healing journey, helping other people with their struggles. That's the thing about Chiron, is the wounded healer, is that we have our experiences, and then that we can take those experiences and utilize them as a means to help other people. I do see that. And of course, Jupiter, really rules the realm of kind of our social wealth and the big picture of society. And so there are opportunities also with this, that we heal by sharing our journey, and we help other people by also that have similar struggles by sharing what we're going through, and it helps everyone. So I do see some healing. I do see some difficult conversations at the same time with Mercury in a square to Mars as well, and so it's going to be an interesting next weekend. I don't want to say it's going to be necessarily calm leading up to that point because I don't, but I think the next couple of days until we get to next weekend when the Sun and Uranus come into the conjunction, that's when things are going to turn back on again. On the 20th is our third quarter moon, and we have the Sun in a sextile to Saturn. So even though there's some difficult transits, there's also a lot of really good opportunity for transformation with all these sextiles. And you can see even in the chart that the lines are getting bolder as we start going through the week. So again, that third quarter moon is a T-square with, Black Moon Lilith again. So third quarter moons, crisis in consciousness. This is where we start stripping away and distilling things down. So along with that, we have the Sun in a sextile to Saturn. It's in the last degree of Pisces. So this is a pretty potent moment here on the 20th. And a Sun sextile Saturn is it's a harmonious thing, right? Because you have Taurus's grounded, practical approach and Saturn's discipline, but then you have the Pisces energy that is very intuitive, it's very spiritual, it's very humanitarian, right? Broad spectrum. So there's a lot of personal growth that comes with this sextile, right? You can feel motivated to work diligently toward long-term goals. Practical planning, setting healthy boundaries while staying empathic. That is huge for the Pleiadian starseed people. I think that this is going to be one of those moments that really brings that into focus. And this type of sextile will definitely support setting healthy boundaries while staying empathetic. You might find balance between practical needs and emotional connection. So, there's definitely the possibility of getting stuck in rigid routines or being overly cautious. The Piscean energy where Saturn is, especially as it's about to go into Aries, is probably going to help us be a little bit more flexible. And then you have the T-square with the moon at 30 degrees Aquarius, 30 degrees Taurus with the Sun, and then opposite Lilith, that T-square. And 30 degrees Aquarius is, the conscious totality of being, right? It's when you realize that everything is connected to everything else. It's quite the degree, actually, if we were to look at Sabian symbols. It says, deeply rooted in the past of a very ancient culture. This is 30 degrees Aquarius, by the way. A spiritual brotherhood in which many individual minds are merged into the glowing light of a unanimous consciousness is revealed to one who has emerged successfully from metamorphosis, right? And I do feel like that is what's happening right now. We are emerging from this. And this T-square opposite Lilith is just going to bring this right to the forefront. I do feel, though, that this sextile with Saturn is going to be really important in terms of setting those healthy boundaries, staying empathic. It's a good time for practical planning, budgeting, structuring creative projects, right? There is this Saturn rewards slow and methodical effort, and Taurus ensures you're building on solid ground. So that's definitely, there's this steady progress through structured effort and emotional insight because of the Pisces energy. I just think before we get there, there's clearly some tension that is building leading up to the 20th. And then the Sun is going to sextile Neptune because it's going to come into Gemini. And there's going to be a couple more pretty big transits before we come into the balsamic moon. Let's see here. The Sun is going to trine Pluto. Mercury is going to meet Uranus as well. So remember, Pluto is retrograde, and that's going to be on the 24th. Let's see here. And you can see that, the boldness of the lines in the chart really does suggest that things are going to get that much more just impactful in terms of the astrology. So the 24th, the Sun is in a trine to Pluto retrograde, which, again, insightful breakthroughs, empowering you to articulate profound ideas, right? We're talking about Gemini here, navigate group dynamics with clarity and influence. And it's a really potent time for rethinking structures, embracing change, communicating transformative visions. So I think by this point, we're going to start really, like I said, embracing that change, rethinking our values, rethinking structure, and communicating them. And a lot of inner reflection with the Pluto retrograde. And then on top of that, you have Mercury that's going to meet Uranus, Saturn that's going to come into Aries, and then Mercury that's going to come into Gemini and meet up with Saturn. Boy, oh boy. Okay, so Mercury conjunct Uranus in the same place that the Sun did for the most part. Same degree of a woman past her change of life experiences a new love. Expect a blend of mental clarity and sudden insight with a grounded practical twist. So it can, again, spark unexpected ideas, breakthroughs, and thinking. So when it was the Sun, it was more of these breakthroughs in terms of our self and our the way that we express ourselves, and certainly how we are our personality in fullness. That's what the Sun represents. Then with Mercury and Uranus, I mean, these two rule different facets of the mind, right? The mind and the higher mind. So when they come together, this sparks these breakthroughs of the collective consciousness, like coming right into our individual mind and our individual consciousness. So again, unexpected ideas, breakthroughs in thinking, surprising conversations. And again, we're at this in the Pleiadian energy, right? That part of the natural world is making this transition through the stages of life without losing the infinite nature of our soul. So sudden clarity, unconventional solutions to stubborn problems, an urge to express ideas that challenge the status quo, and disruptions in routine communications. I would definitely consider something like that as well. And there may be, especially with Mercury, but also with the Sun, but with Mercury in Taurus, I do get the sense that there may be something that gets sparked, or there's some sort of unpredictable flash here in terms of resources, right? Some sort of currency or anything like that. That could certainly come about with this as well. Saturn comes into Aries also on this day. And then Mercury comes into its home territory of Gemini, and then it comes into a sextile with Saturn that's newly in Aries. And I think that's really important, whereas the Sun was in that sextile in the feminine, right? In the Pisces and Taurus energies. But by the time Mercury gets around to having that sextile, they're both going to be in fire and air, right? And so it definitely fosters clear thinking, focused thinking, effective communication, especially with Mercury in Gemini. That's going to help, I think, with Saturn being in Aries, that is now at its fall position. So there's a curious nature to Mercury and Gemini, and there's a responsibility with Saturn no matter where it is. So there's a support for productive conversations here and strategic planning. Saturn can get extra rigid as a compensation for being in its fall position in Aries. So it could really stifle the mutability of Gemini, especially Mercury in Gemini. So you could be very overly cautious. You could get very critical in your thinking. There could be a sense of fear about what is emerging that, you won't really let yourself, you find yourself just getting too enmeshed in it, rather than having the boundaries that we're talking about, where you can be empathic and intuitive, but also have very healthy boundaries. I feel like this is going to come up with this sextile for some reason, because you can't completely cut yourself off from life and the universe and nature, but you also don't want to be so consumed, and by, or just taken over by what's happening, that you can't make the most of the changes. And I feel like this is continual opportunity to practice all of this so that we are not finding ourselves just being apathetic or not preparing for what's to come. If we go back to the new moon, right? If we go back to the new moon energy, which was 8 degrees, I never put my glasses on. That's funny. 8 degrees, 7 to 8 degrees Taurus, right? The sleigh that is on the land uncovered by the snow. The idea that we have all the tools and equipment necessary. Maybe it's a skill, maybe it is an actual piece of equipment, whatever it is that we anticipate. And there's kind of a future oriented thinking in terms of preparing for that state, even if it's not right now. And I do feel like that as the magnetic field of the planet continues to weaken, we have to get just better at managing our own personal energy in relation to that. And I do feel like there are interests that are continuing to take advantage of that and make that a very difficult process to get through. It's already difficult, I think, but making it more difficult or blocking, I mean, the obvious geoengineering stuff to block sunlight is one perfect way to, it's a perfect example of what I'm getting at here, is that there are a myriad of ways that we could be blocked, but we also need to not just let everything in. And not only that, but it's not just about blocking or being a total open book. It has a lot to do with utilizing the skills and the materials and resources that we have that are inherent to us, that are valuable, whatever those values are to you, and being able to transubstantiate that which is given to us by life, right? Taking the lemons and making the lemonade. And like I said, we don't have any control over what necessarily the sun is doing or the weakening of the planet's field, but we do have a choice and free will in how we interact with those energies. And, there is, well, I've made a lot of content around how to work with things bioelectrically, right? And through biophysics. So I would also encourage you, if you haven't read it already, is to read the Electric Life by Robert Becker. It really, I'm not through it yet, but it really lays it out and all of his research in a very methodical way of how he came to the conclusions that he did, that the basis of life is electromagnetic and not necessarily biochemical. So my friends, I'm gonna leave it there for this particular full moon forecast. I hope everyone is doing well. If you are interested in Catalyst membership, where you get a number of collective energy readings posted to your membership site, and there are discounts correspondent to whatever tier that you sign up for, you can find that link in the description box below under Catalyst membership. For those of you who have signed up, your next collective energy reading will be posted on the membership page next weekend, and we'll go from there. There's not much else to report right now. Let's just see how we get through this full moon. There will be a solstice report coming at some point in the nearish future, because that's around the corner as well, is the upcoming June solstice, which in my eclipse forecast, if you remember, I definitely anticipated that solstice time and Cancer season was going to really test our root strength, right? As Saturn and Neptune are now both in Aries. So all of the solstice energy, the sun and Mercury, Jupiter coming into Cancer very soon, all going to be squaring Saturn and Neptune coming into the first degrees of Aries. So it's going to be, we're going to have, we're going to really know where we're really just going to know what we're made of at that point. So I hope everyone is doing as well as they can. So take care of yourself. Take care of the people around you as best you can. Again, happy Mother's Day. That's all I got for now. I'll see you all later. Peace.